Hey, this is William Michael. Yesterday I said that I'm going to be rebuilding our family farm and gardens, and I think it would be helpful since I get a lot of questions about gardening and farm work from families who know that we've been in farming for quite a while. I thought it would be good to sort of record some of the tasks that are done as I go about rebuilding a farm and gardens, and I'll try to make this as basic and simple as I can, because really most of the questions that come in are from families who live in suburbs or cities, and they think about getting out into the country one day, and their questions are really very basic, like how do you do things in an affordable way, in a simple, sustainable way. So I want to keep all of this stuff really simple and basic, and assure you that I really don't spend any money on this stuff. It's really very simple, and I'm going to prove that to you as we go through here. Yesterday I gave a sort of an overview of the area behind the house where I'm developing and laying out new gardens. You're not going to see me do what you see on many websites, which is buying all kinds of supplies from Home Depot and building raised beds and all that kind of stuff. That's really not a sustainable way to go about this, especially if you want to grow a decent amount of produce. You're going to see me do things in a much simpler way with really no supplies, not much in the way of supplies at all, and just a bunch of manual labor using some simple tools. And I'll share those tools with you, really just 3 or 4 tools that I use. And as I said, I put in about 2 hours a day in the gardens and on the farm when I get done with some office work. And what happens at this time of the day is my wife takes the kids, my daughter goes to her dance classes, my sons go to the gym, my 2 older sons, my 2 teenage sons who are still home, they go out running at this time, so I'm usually left by myself at home for a couple hours of peace and quiet. And what I normally do is go out and put a couple hours of work in while I listen to the writings of St. Thomas in an audiobook or something like that. And I just enjoy this as a time to get outside, listen to St. Thomas, and work in the garden while getting as much physical exercise as I can in a 2-hour period. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is flip my camera around and show you what I'm working on. Give me 1 second. So you can see we're out here in this area where I'm going to be building some gardens. And yesterday I mentioned digging a little pond area over here, which you can see. You can see there's a compost area behind there. The other garden area that's going to be developed is over there. And then all the way back around, you see a second compost pile in the back over there. So I've always got a couple of compost piles going to develop new soil for the gardens. But here in this area, you see it's just overgrown with brush and junk. And the process is I simply lay out the bed. You can see these T-posts and some string is used to lay out a bed that's 4 feet wide, and I leave a couple feet for a path in between. And all I do is chop all the weeds down, as you can see. I cut them down short, and then with a shovel I just turn over the soil and bury all the weeds 6 to 8 inches under that topsoil. This is the same thing that we do when we plow. It's just done by shovel in a small sustainable garden area. So the same concept in plowing is applied to working in a garden by just turning the dirt over with a shovel. So we go from that just messy brush to this, which is just roughly overturned soil. And if you look over to the other beds here, you can just see that we've got some zucchini growing. There's some cantaloupe coming up on those mounds in there. Here are some peppers growing, and then there's a bunch of tomatoes. And there's another bed down here. From this bed here, where the shovel is, you can see there's just some leftover weeds where I just harvested a ton of garlic. So now that the garlic's done, I'm just going to turn over this bed and get the next crop started. And that's how the beds of the garden work. You'll notice that I have raised beds. If you look, you can see that they're raised, but it's just that the soil is mounded. There's no wooden boxes or any expensive stuff like that. Just very simple. Even as the tomatoes get started, you can see all I've got are sticks driven into the ground just to help the tomatoes get upright. And as the season goes on, I'll continue to reinforce them and support them as they grow. But it's all just very simple. No expensive supplies, no expensive equipment, no tillers, no tractors or anything like that. It's just simple manual work. So what I'm doing today, I finished turning this next bed over the other day, and now what I've got to do is dig out the paths in between the beds. So you can see this one I've got about halfway done, maybe 2/3 of the way done. You can see where these weeds stop down there, and I've just got to finish up this side of the path and then come over here onto the other side of the bed and turn over all of this soil, and all I do is shovel it upside down into the bed, and that's how I make the path. So the depth of the bed is created by just shoveling the path soil with the weeds into the desired bed area. And I'll do that here to develop the next bed, and then I'll go back over to where the garlic just came out from, and I'll do the same over there to prepare 2 new beds for the next round of planting. And I'm just going to continue that over time through the rest of this measured out garden area, and eventually this will all be filled with garden beds that look like that. Now you can see in my gardens, they don't have the picture perfect look that you'll see on some blogs and websites. You'll see that there's grass in the paths, and there'll be some weeds in the beds. Not a whole lot, but some. This is what gardening looks like when you're not using any chemicals. I'm not spraying anything in these gardens. I'm not running tillers through these gardens. I keep the plants clean because the goal here is to grow vegetables. I'm not really primarily concerned with how the garden looks, although if I get some extra time, I'll clean things up and make it look pretty. But normally I'm just concerned with what's essential to helping the plants grow and do well. And I don't get too worried about aesthetics. It's one of the nice things about living out in the country is your garden's not on display to some judges who are going to compare it with pictures on the internet. What matters is that it produces vegetables. And you can see even these little plants are very fruitful. Simple manual care, I've always found, actually does the best with the produce. The overturned soil, you can see some peppers coming in here, some more peppers over here. The pepper plant's all doing great, but very simple cultivation, very simple management, and I like to keep it simple because, like I said, the goal of gardening is to produce fruit, and it's really very simple as long as the essentials are in place. So today what I'm going to do is work on finishing up this path, and I'll share how that looks when it's done, and then I'll continue on the other side of the bed, and we'll get this garden going. One more thing before I wrap up here is you can see how after I dig this bed up, it's just a bunch of clumps, shovel loads of dirt. And some might think, oh, it would be good, run a tiller through there. You don't need to run a tiller, because what you'll notice is that once it rains, or I even will just hose it down, water will break up these clods and soften the soil and get it ready for planting. You don't need to go through and mechanically pulverize it all. I'll just water it. When I water the garden, I'll just water the bed, and when it rains, it'll just sort of melt this soil down until it's smooth, and then when it's time to plant, I'll go through with a hoe and just cut it up and make it fine. But there's not really a whole lot of work needed. The overturning of the soil with the shovel, just like plowing in a field, is the difficult work. And after that, it's pretty simple. And I'll try to share these steps as we go, just to show you how simple it is to manage the gardens. And again, I've got nothing here but a shovel and a hoe for for all these gardens. So let me get to work now, and I'll share what I get done later on by the end of this work time. It was about an hour, maybe less, maybe 45 minutes of work. And you can see here that I've piled up the soil here on this bed. I've dug half of this path. You can see it's 1 shovel width wide, and I just go down and dig it up and throw the soil onto the bed. And I finished up this other side as well. So this bed is all finished being dug. I'll let it sit here overnight, maybe a day or two. Let the weeds that got dug up die now that they've all been turned over. And then I'll start finishing up this bed in order to plant it in a couple weeks. It's June 13th today, so I've got the dilemma whether I should put something in like beans or sweet potatoes, or just wait another month and get the fall garden started. But I'll probably put some beans in to have some fresh green beans through the summer. And then in August we'll start putting the fall planting together. In North Carolina here, we can garden year round. So once I get all these beds built and this garden starts rolling, it'll just constantly run year round. Over the winter we'll have broccoli and other winter greens that we'll eat through the winter time, and then around February we'll plant peas, and then we'll be back into the spring gardens, and then just cycle through. And what's cool about working with beds like this is we don't need to do any crazy crop rotation, because we just constantly change the beds around, and we don't really need to plan that, because the beds become available as different vegetables come to maturity and finish up. And so we just pull out those plants that are finished producing and replace them with the new planting, and keep cycling throughout the year. So this bed is done. So now what I'm going to do, because this bed is done, I'm just going to pull up this T-post here, which is just stuck in the ground here for my string line. And I'll pull this one out as well. So I'll just pull these T-posts out, and I'm going to do that on the other side as well, and then bring them back over to this first row where the garlic just finished up. And I'm going to start digging this bed to get the next cycle of planting going. And I'll show you how I do that, set that all up, and then you'll have an idea about how this deep bed gardening works. And it just constantly cycles through. As each crop finishes, a new crop gets planted, and the garden just works. And as far as planning the garden goes, planning, not planting, planning, once you find out how much space you have to garden, you figure out how many beds you can fit into that space. And then once you've got all your gardens laid out and all your beds laid out, you get an idea of how many total beds you have, how much space you actually have, and then you can start planning what you're going to grow, when and where and how much. And you've just got a set number of beds that you work with throughout the year. So I'm going to build these beds here in this garden, and it's going to go back here a little bit. I'll just take you for a walk through here. If you're from the suburb and you don't know what that gray thing is over there, that's our well. So that's our water source. It's about 230 feet deep, and it's just a cheesy little plastic cover on the well. You see, it's surrounded by some roses my wife bought because she wants me to build a little rose garden around the well. But you can see this garden area comes back, extends back here, and ends right about there. You can see where the line where I cut the grass is. So all of this area here will be turned into garden beds, and the same will be done on the other side of this garden area over behind the barn. So all of that area there will be turned into beds. And you can see along the back of the garden line, going across there, you might be able to see them. There's some young fruit trees getting started. Down the end there are a couple pear trees, and then we've got a couple apple trees. Over here, because I've got this pond starting, it'll take some time for me to continue digging and allowing it to fill, but this will turn into a nice little garden pond over time. And I planted one willow tree there that'll eventually grow big and sort of hang over into the edge of this pond, and I'm going to put another willow tree on the other side of this pond, right about where you see that T-post is over there in the tall grass. So we'll have two big willow trees here, just growing over and hanging into the pond to make it look pretty. It'll be shady back here, a nice place to get out of the heat. And then over here on the other side you see more apple trees getting started along the back and a compost pile back there. So everything just getting started in this garden, because like I said, we're restarting the farm on this property, and I'll get this set of garden beds all built and running this summer, and hopefully by the time the fall gardens start, I'll be working on this other side over here until the whole area is filled with working beds. And once that's done, the gardens just start running through the seasons. So the next thing I'm going to do is lay out this first bed and start turning it over for the next planting to begin. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started, and I'll show you how I do that. So here you can see that I have laid out the string to mark out this first bed. You can see I drove the T-posts in. The beds that I build are 4 feet wide. They're 4 feet wide, and then there'll be a 2-foot path in between the beds. And you can just see that this bed sort of eroded and wore down over the garden season. The garlic was planted last fall, so it grew in this bed for almost 8 months before it was harvested. So when you see a bed like this, and you see that I build these beds with no boxes or anything like that, you'll see that they just slowly wear down, and by the time the growing season's over, the garden just sort of leveled out again, and I just rebuild the bed, and I just keep cycling through like that, season by season. So what I'm going to do now here is just start turning over this bed, and it'll look like that other bed I just finished once I'm done with it. And as I said before, we'll probably get some green beans in here for the summer, and keep this garden going until it's time to plant the fall garden, which is one of our favorite gardens because all the greens go in and we get all our salad stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and start digging this bed, and I won't get this done today. Like I said, I put 2 hours a day in. That other bed, finishing that up, took about 45 minutes. So I've got about an hour left today, and I'll get as much of this bed done as I can and just stick the shovel in the ground when my 2 hours are up, and tomorrow I'll pick up where I left off. And that's how I go about these tasks. Just get as much done as I can each day, and try to get as much physical exercise as I can, and develop all this stuff in a responsible, sustainable way within my daily work. So I'm going to go ahead and get to work on this bed, and we'll see how much I can get done. Sometimes you get a good surprise, and today I had said that I don't know how much I would get done of this bed, but in just an hour, because the soil, having been cultivated last season, was so soft, I was able to get this whole bed turned over in just an hour. So that's a pleasant surprise, because the garlic had been in over the winter, and we kept it cultivated, and we mulched it over the winter with some fallen leaves that we collected in the fall. The soil is really nice and soft, so it was easy to turn over and dig up. So that just took an hour for a bed that's 4 foot wide by about 40 feet in length. So again, working with just a shovel, it's really not that difficult once things get going. It's difficult to get things started, But like I said, once they get started, the soil starts to loosen up. You start working organic material, all the weeds and leftover scraps that you turn over when you prepare the bed each cycle. The soil just gets deeper and softer, and it gets easier and easier to work. So if you try to dig a bed, let's say you just start with raw ground like this, you're going to find that that ground is compacted and hard. It's difficult to dig, and you might think to yourself, man, this is impossible. But once you get the beds established and you get the soil loosened up, you start working organic material down into it each season, it gets nice and loose and airy, and it's actually very easy to work with. So as of today, in this new garden space, we're up to 5 beds that are 40 foot long, as I said, and 4 foot wide. 5 beds are now up and running. So this garden's getting started pretty well, and the soil looks pretty good. And I'm just going to keep going. So next week I'll start another bed back there and add bed number 6 and keep going, see how many beds. Probably, I would guess we could get 9 beds in this area. So we'll have 40 feet times 9 beds will give us 360 feet of garden space, which is quite a bit of garden space. And then what I'll do next, probably in this garden, you can see these tomatoes have really got growing now, and they're getting wild. So I'll probably get a little more permanent support for them. Probably put some hog panels up and just let them grow up against the hog panels. Maybe I'll work on that my next time out in the garden. But that's all for today. I put my 2 hours in, and as you can see, got a good amount of work done. Got 1 new bed all dug up, as well as the paths on each side of it. So that's ready to be broken up, and I'll just start by hosing that down a couple days and letting these clods break down and soften up, and then I'll start preparing that for planting. And the first bed that we had the garlic in over the winter and just harvested the first week of June, I've got that bed turned over and ready for another planting. So we'll get something going here around mid-June. So that's all for today. Those are my 2 hours. Again, as far as tools go, my shovel's down there at the end of the bed, if you see it. That's one tool. Right here on the ground is this is called a grass whip. It's just a blade that's used for cutting weeds. I mean, as simple and basic as you can get. The tool like this costs $20-30 at the hardware store, and you just whack brush with it. Just take a walk through and clear the brush. Works pretty good as long as you keep it sharp. So I've got a shovel, a grass whip. Here you see a T-post driver that I use just to stick those T-posts in the ground deep enough to hold up while I dig. And that's all the tools I've touched today. Pretty simple. As far as measurements go, I just use my feet. I know that my size 10.5 shoe is exactly 1 foot long. So anytime I want to measure garden space, I just step it off with my feet. And keep it simple. There's really nothing expensive or complicated about this work. It just takes time and patience, and if you look at it as an opportunity to get some physical exercise, and you don't get all stressed out about trying to get vegetables and fruit immediately, try to do this stuff impatiently, you just torment yourself and end up spending as much as you would just to buy the food at the grocery store. If I was going to spend money on gardening, I'd rather just not garden and go to the grocery store. But I do it, like I said, I do it for my physical exercise. And while my family's out in the afternoon, I get some good upper body work, some cardio, and also improve the gardens. And over time, you'll see one of these days I'll take some time to straighten this up and make it look a little nicer and get it cleaned up. I usually do that on Saturdays so that on Sunday we have a nice pretty looking property to hang out in. But that's all for my 2 hours today. So All I'm doing at this phase is developing garden beds. It's really just slow, patient work. And what's good about it is because I have so much work to do academically. My wife sometimes will praise me and tell me that I'm so patient. That's why the gardens do well. But it's not that I'm patient. It's just that I've got other things to do. When you try to garden and you've got nothing else to do and you just sort of stand around staring at the garden, you end up trying to force things and you do all kinds of stupid stuff and end up ruining things, because Americans tend to think that if something's good, then more must be better. But that's not true with gardens. Sometimes you just have to give the garden a few days, even a week, to just grow. And then weeds will come up and it'll get messy, and you put a couple days in, clean things up, straighten things up. And I've always found that it's better to err on the side of doing too little than too much with the gardens. So anyway, turning over garden beds today, continuing to develop this garden area behind the house. We've obviously got lots of room left to go, but we just take it as our daily workout and keep it simple. Work patiently and don't put any unrealistic expectations or unnecessary deadlines on ourselves, and we just keep it as peaceful, enjoyable work. So if you've got any questions about this kind of stuff, let me know. I'm trying to keep this as basic and simple as I can, because like I said, most of the folks who write with questions and ask for help, they're just looking for bare bones, basic, beginning garden help and farm stuff. And that's the kind of stuff I'm going to share. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So if you are getting started, you don't need to spend any money or do anything crazy. It's not like Bob Vila, where he's got $80,000 bobcats doing, landscaping work and stuff like that. I'll show you how to do things if you have no money and all you can afford is a couple pieces of manual equipment like shovel, rake, hoe, things like that. As long as you've got the strength and the will to do some work, and you've got the time and patience to allow it to develop, you really don't need to spend money to build gardens. You just need to persevere and do one thing at a time, take it one day at a time. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see me work on or do that you need help with, or would like to see how I'd approach it in a simple way, the way I do things, and I'd be happy to record and share that. God bless.